Oh, right. We are recording now, and we're talking about building Web3 building equity in Web3, the next generation internet. So to talk about Web3, we really have to talk about what is Web 1 and Web 2. So Web 1, or the inaugural internet. So we're talking late 1990s or throughout the 90s. It was heavily content, provider driven, so you've got, I have some examples there: MSN, AOL, Yahoo, pushing content to users. So very little user generated, very little user interaction. It's mostly published content. Web 2.0, so early 2000s, when we have Amazon and Google. A little bit later in the 2000s, social media like Facebook. Now you're starting to see a lot more user generated content filling the internet. And you're also seeing e-commerce. You're seeing more interaction, right? So there's interaction, but an important distinction is there's not user ownership. Those guys up there in the cloud are the ones that own everything on the internet these days. And what Web3 is really about is, well, for one, as you can see in the graphic, it starts to lean towards primarily user generated content, but I think even more importantly, user owned content. And peer-to-peer interaction. So the folks building Web3 are really about ownership going back to users and creators, and instead of a small number of companies that generate money. Right now, if I make a meme, put it on Facebook, Facebook uses that and it says it goes viral. I get lucky, it goes viral. Facebook makes a lot of money off ads on that. I don't make a dime. But in Web3, the idea is I should be able to own that if I created it, and I should be able to extract value from it as an owner. And I have YouTube, Facebook, and stuff. They're still there in Web3, but they're not central to Web3. Web3 is really about a network of peer-to-peer interaction. And this slide kind of talks about it in broad terms too. So what we mean by it's Web3, a big part of it is decentralization. So you'll hear me talk about that a few times today. And what does decentralized mean? Well, in Web 2.0, we're centralized. So if see these dots are like users on Facebook, they're not interacting directly with each other. They're interacting through Facebook. Facebook is at the center. It's centralized. Web3 is decentralized. There's something called Lens protocol, which is kind of like a very early nascent stage social media in Web3, and basically you see nodes. So all of these nodes are equal. No node is controlling the others. The Lens protocol exists in all these nodes, and the users are all interacting more directly with these nodes. The nodes are kind of all on equal footing. So this is just to give you a sense of what we mean by decentralized. There's no centralized entity when it comes to Lens protocols, social media, as an example. Cynthia, I think you have a
And I just want to kind of add to that, maybe like what that could mean for historically underrepresented communities. And, traditionally, historically underrepresented communities have faced gatekeepers a lot, telling them what they can and what they can't do. So the decentralization that comes with Web3 could afford more opportunities because, the barriers to enter are just much lower. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go throughout the throughout the presentation.
Great, thank you. So we're gonna walk through some of the Web3 building blocks. I think some of the more kind of important concepts to just have a real basic understanding of, in order to kind of understand what Web3 is about and how it applies to your work. There's a lot to Web3. I sometimes describe it as a rabbit hole full of rabbit holes, and we don't need to go down all of them. So we're doing our best here to touch on some of the more important things and try not to get too in the weeds because it gets very technical very fast. And so I've personally been working on a balance of giving some information to provide some understanding without going too far into it. So we'll talk about blockchain and Ethereum. An Ethereum network is a specific blockchain that's very central to Web3, is why we're going to talk about it. Cryptocurrency, DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous organizations. And we'll talk about that in more depth, and the metaverse. So starting with blockchain. So blockchain is the underlying technology of Web3. And what blockchain is it's a distributed ledger technology. It's distributed, meaning a given blockchain exists in thousands of locations simultaneously, like I was showing you the decentralized map before. It's a ledger, so it keeps track of transactions. And the way that it's designed with cryptography, it's immutable and unhackable. And the ones we're going to be talking about today are public. So there is such thing as private blockchains, but that's not what we're talking about. When we're talking about Web3, we're talking about public blockchains, the Ethereum network, the Bitcoin network. Those are all public blockchains. So it's owned and used by a network of public users for peer-to-peer interaction. Just a couple of other things to point out. So there's not a blockchain, there's many of them. Bitcoin is one, Ethereum is another, there's many others. And the first one, which you probably are all most familiar with, is Bitcoin. So the proof point, the proof case was Bitcoin when it launched in 2008. So that was the very first blockchain. But we want to address some misperceptions as we go along of each of these things. And so our first misperception, Cynthia.
Yeah, I mean, and I would just say that this is kind of the biggest misperception about blockchain technology, is that somehow it is going to be the great equalizer. And I just think that it is important to remember that, first of all, I think there's a lot of potential with blockchain, but remember, there are people behind blockchains. There are people involved in coming up with problems and solutions that need to be addressed. And so I would just say that, hey, there's a lot of potential here, but it's also really important that we center everybody's problem. And this, of course, is important as we think about populations that are traditionally excluded or are left behind. You know, what one person's problem and solution is positive when it comes to blockchain as a way to address an issue, could have, you know, negative consequences for another population. And I'll just kind of give you an example of a use case. So I was watching somebody or listening to somebody talk about the need for employers to be able to verify credentials when they are during the hiring process, and how that oftentimes can take a long time. And so they propose using blockchain as a way for universities to verify degrees, so that rather than waiting, you can just go, your credential is housed on a blockchain, and the process could be expedited. And I think that that is amazing if you are attending a university that has adopted this. You know, if you went to Stanford or MIT or Berkeley, and if they are, you know, early adopters of this, and that's great. But what does it mean for populations that may be attending universities that have not adopted that approach yet? So I just say that to as an example of why it's really important to really think about solutions and problems and what that means for the broader society of people, not just kind of, you know, one small slither of people.
Yes, thank you, Cynthia. And just to kind of go a little bit further with it, like I was saying earlier, it's kind of important to go into what Ethereum network is, because that is central to Web3. Ethereum is a blockchain, and it's not just an example of a blockchain, but it's central to Web3. And when we were prepping and talking about this, the way I like to put it is that the Web3 could exist without Bitcoin, but it couldn't exist without Ethereum, at least not now, because Ethereum was the network that it was, when it was launched in 2015, introduced smart contracts, which are really what unlock a lot of potential in blockchain and the whole Web3 space. So before smart contracts, the blockchain was mainly used for transacting cryptocurrency. That was it. That's all Bitcoin does, and it's all it's going to do for the foreseeable future. Ethereum does so many more things because of the smart contract. What smart contract is code that's actually embedded into the blockchain And it's a code-based contract that sets the terms of a transaction that can be repeated but not reversed. So there's all sorts of types of transactions that can occur on there. Some are financial, of course, but there's also transactions like we were just talking about. So I'm going to go into a couple of examples. Those smart contracts allow people to store and verify credentials, learning and employment records. Cynthia mentioned this, Emmanuel mentioned this in the chat. So this is being experimented with now, a learning and employment record, and it's because of a smart contract on Ethereum. I don't know if these are stored on Ethereum. I'm assuming they probably are, but that allows you to share your work history and your credentials with somebody using a smart contract. It could also be used for verifying work and sending payment. So a smart contract could be set up so that someone you're performing work for clicks a button and says the work's done, I received the work, and the smart contract will automatically send money, send cryptocurrency probably. It also allows for digital ownership of real or virtual assets. And that's where the concept of NFTs comes in. NFT was something that hit the cutting room floor in our presentation. I'm going to go deep into what NFTs are. But NFTs are non-fungible tokens, and they allow for basically proof of ownership. You can think of them as like a deed to owning either a digital or a real world asset. They got tied up in digital art and stuff, but that's not, an NFT is not digital art. It proves ownership of something, but it blew up in the digital art space for whatever reason. But anyway, I digress. So next, we're going to touch on anything to add to this, Cynthia, before I go to cryptocurrency, or is that recovered? Okay.
Nope. Any questions? Does anybody have any questions about what we've covered already, though? And I'm loving the discussion in the chat. All right, let's keep moving, Matt.
All right. So another fundamental piece that of Web3 that's important to know about is cryptocurrency. And this is why you heard Cynthia's disclaimer in the beginning, because we're not telling you when to invest in anything. But cryptocurrency is a digital currency. It can be sent peer-to-peer publicly, but anonymously and without an intermediary. So this is going back to what we were talking about Web3, is Web3 is really built to be peer-to-peer and not have to rely on banks or rely on intermediaries. And in the case of the learner employment record, you don't have to rely on a previous employer to verify employment. You don't have to rely on an institution to verify your credentials. It's stored on the blockchain. You have a key to it that you can share access to your record. So it doesn't require intermediaries. And that's what cryptocurrency unlocks, that in the financial space. There's thousands of them, including Bitcoin and Ether. And Ether is the native crypto or native token for the Ethereum network. And really the way to think about it is it's a tool for exchange of value in Web3, right? Like that's how peer-to-peer digital payments can happen instantaneously across the world without a Western Union, without a Bank of America. That's what it's for. And then, so that leads us to another misperception. Crypto is one big Ponzi scheme. So if you've heard it about anything in the media, it's probably about either a hack of, that's happened and crypto was stolen, or people losing money in it because it was a bad investment. Sure, those things happen, and there's definitely people trying to take advantage of other people in the space, but that's not what cryptocurrency is. Cryptocurrency was invented so that people can exchange money digitally from anywhere in the world, more or less instantaneously, without the need for an intermediary. And it's it's sort of central to Web3 to allow these so in a moment, we'll talk about the organizations being built off of it. It allows them to function without having to go through traditional intermediaries like banks. So that's really what it's about. So I would ignore it's a great investment opportunity, it's a Ponzi scheme. It's none of that. It's a tool, It's as silly as saying that the US dollar is a Ponzi scheme. You can make an argument for that if you wanted to. But I will move on to our next slide. So yeah, Cynthia.
Yeah, so just, we think about some of the advantages of cryptocurrency and some possible ways to use it. Globally, when we think about crypto, it could be an interesting solution for your stakeholders living in the US and supporting families in other countries. To the left, you'll see the 7 countries where almost half of the world's population that is unbanked resides. You have Bangladesh, China, India, Indonesia, Mexico, Nigeria, and Pakistan. So with cryptocurrency, you can send transactions instantly. You don't have to worry about business hours, which, is important when you're thinking about people living on different, parts of the world. And of course, you can invest globally. Crypto has been especially appealing in countries that have experienced hyperinflation, in countries where the government interferes with financial transactions. I was listening to a Twitter space once, and they were talking about nonprofits and people wanting to send money to a specific country to help with whatever, but there was government interference. And so nonprofits were starting to set up wallets so they could receive cryptocurrency instead. And then where mobile phones are the main method to access the internet, since it's easy for transactions to really take place on phones now. So those are kind of just some of the ways that stakeholders, particularly those who are supporting families in other countries, may be using or may be thinking about using crypto.
Yeah, and I just want to, there was just a couple of questions in the chat. So Kim, you asked, isn't Bitcoin just another type of bank? So it's true that you pay fees to transact on these networks, but the major difference is you're paying a fee to the network itself. And any one of us, well, Bitcoin's different because you have to invest in software, but the way Ethereum's set up, anyone can be part of the network that receives the fee. You can be a staker, so you're basically paying the network to conduct the transaction. And you can also be part of that network. You can be staked in that network. I mean, when's the last time you could share part of your bank's fee? So yes, you're paying it to other peers that are transactions for you. So it's very different than like a bank fee where you're paying it to essential, you're paying for a central entity to function. Yeah, and then Robert asked, what crypto should we invest in to become rich quick? That's the question we're not going to answer. We can't give out, we're not giving out financial advice.
I didn't even see the question, so
that's a whole different show.
I don't have my fingerprints on that.
Just kidding. Okay, so moving on to, more of the concerns too. So, and we'll address some of these. It's highly volatile, and that is true. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ether go up and down by large swings. A lot of cryptocurrency does, and that's part of the reason that it's hard to use for everyday expenses, because its value is not reliable. There are things called stable coins, which is also a bit of a tangent that allow, basically a stable coin is always worth $1 US, and it's a little bit easier to use. But it is an issue, of how volatile it is and how reliable it would be to live off of crypto or to live off an income of crypto. Tax laws and regulation are being developed, and it leaves a lot of uncertainty. So there's still a lot of uncertainty how you report it on your taxes, if you have it as income, or how you transact and what are legal ways to do it. They can't even decide if cryptocurrency is a commodity or a security. There's a big argument going on at the federal level of how to even classify it, because currency is a little misleading. It doesn't really act like a normal currency. It's kind of all of those things: commodity, security, currency. So it leaves a lot of uncertainties. We don't know what some of the regulation is going to be. There's a lot of that is still yet to happen. And it is rife with scammers. People are taking advantage of the fact that there's little knowledge in the space and there's ignorance, and it is easier probably to be scammed in investing in crypto than it is with US dollars right now, which is why we want to, Cynthia and I are kind of dedicated to figuring out how to best educate communities about it. That's one of the things we'd like to work on. So.
Yeah, and there was a recent article in The Economist that really reported out on the recent crypto crash and how it impacted African American communities particularly hard. They cited a study that found that 25% of African Americans own crypto compared to 15%. And there's a real knowledge gap when it comes to kind of like understanding crypto and, you know, how safe it is. So Black Americans are almost twice as likely to describe cryptocurrencies as a safe investment. 30% of Black investors believe crypto is regulated by the US government compared to only 14% of white investors. So it's really important, I think, to consider, you know, knowledge gaps that might exist among different communities, which one can expect. I mean, our country really has a history of segregated communities, and so it's kind of hard sometimes for knowledge to get to everyone. So just something to point out as we think about people who might be disproportionately impacted by the negative sides of crypto.
Yeah, absolutely. Emmanuel brings up too also that, for instance, people don't realize you can't share your private key. So that's like sharing your password to your email, you know, or your password to your bank account, really.
Yeah.
Like if you had, that's, you know, when you have a digital wallet, you have a private key that you never ever share. But that's one way that wallets get compromised all the time, is people are tricked into sharing their private key. You only share your public key. That's all you need for a transaction. So just one of the many things that, you know, needs to be more broadly understood, you know, for it to be safer to operate, you know, in this world with cryptocurrency. So that brings us to DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations. And this is what really ignited my interest in Web3. I'd been passively paying attention to blockchain and cryptocurrency until about December of last year, when I first heard about DAOs for the first time. And I think this is really where a way that the rubber meets the road, and how Web3 unlocks new work and new jobs. So what are DAOs? They're organizations that are based in the Ethereum blockchain, or at least kind of born on the Ethereum blockchain. And they're launched with a smart contract that generate a token. And you can think of the token as shares. So they usually start by generating a token on Ethereum. And so one of the unique things about Ethereum is you can create your own token. You can create your own cryptocurrency. Essentially, it's a type of cryptocurrency. It's sort of like, when we're talking DAOs, it's like having shares in a company. It's like we're starting a company and there's going to be 1 million shares available, and this is how we're doing an initial distribution of them. That's how they start. But what's really cool in how they operate is they're really characterized by a lack of formal leadership. They're run completely by committees, elected positions that rotate. Radical transparency, that you can basically join any meeting you want to. Their budgets are fully transparent. People's positions and everything, they vote on most everything they do, and everybody in the DAO has a vote. The autonomy of members, you know, you have a lot of autonomy to operate as little or as much as you'd like to. You can drop in and do a little bit of work. You can take on a more formal role. A lot of flexibility in that. A lot of comfort with anonymity, which we'll get back to, because you know, the importance of identity is low, and that leads to the last one, only skills-based work. So I joined a DAO just to test it out and figure out what they were about. I figured it was the best way to learn. It really was. But they've never seen my LinkedIn page. They've never seen a resume from me. They don't even know my real name. And I was able to drop in and do some writing and be paid in cryptocurrency for it, because identity doesn't matter. It's only skills-based work. You know, you go in and you show, there's no HR, there's no screening of resumes, at least in the way they operate now. But even if the DAO experiment doesn't fully pan out, the learning from this is amazing. They basically are rebuilding organizations from the ground up on blockchain, you know, in Web3. So these are just a few of the DAOs that exist now. So there's some agencies that do, there's around 5,000 of them right now. And most of them started in the last year and a half or two. Just to give you kind of an idea on the broad scope of what they do. They tend to be kind of insular to tech and crypto. but the concepts and the fundamentals of them, I see so much potential in. I mean, there's so many types of organizations you could run the way they run these DAOs. And let's see, one more slide. I'm just kind of how they're organized. You know, the traditional organization is on the left, and I'm just realizing now the graphic I took has a misspelling in it. But the CEO at the top, and then you've got, you know, it trickles on down through middle management and your frontline staff. But a decentralized organization, everybody's on equal footing. You know, there's not formal leadership. There are coordinators, you know, so you might take on a temporary role to coordinate something, but usually that rotates. And like I said, everything's kind of voted on by committee. You can join the committees you want to join and so forth. I was just going to go into one example of a DAO, and then I can pause again for questions or for Cynthia to comment as well on this. This is the DAO that I've been participating in, and they're about kind of the sharing more about the decentralized finance, which is, you know, another, you know, kind of the larger meta space around cryptocurrency. It was started by a couple of podcasters, and it's really a media organization to help people understand what decentralized finance is. They put out some really good products around teaching people what it's about, how to use a digital wallet, all those kinds of things. And this is, I thought it'd be interesting just to have a snapshot. That's the code. That's the actual smart contract on the Ethereum blockchain. So, you know, if all blockchains, or at least the public blockchains, have a blockchain explorer, this is one of many you could access for Ethereum. And it shows you the smart contract, just a snippet of the smart contract, not the whole thing, that established the token for the bankless DAO that started up their DAO. So just to see what, I got some requests in previous presentations of what does it look like? What is a smart contract? That's part of a smart contract right there. And I could go into a lot more depth than what's in there, but I won't, because that may be too much. So, you know, on this one, because we assumed that there wasn't going to be as much awareness of it, we didn't go into a misperception about it, but wanted to touch on the opportunities for equity. Because there's not identity tied to it, and because they're very, you know, they're sort of open-ended and equal, we think applying this in other spaces would really create more equitable and accessible work opportunities. It has very low barriers to entry for entrepreneurs, significant flexibility and independence of work. Like I was saying, the way they're set up now, you can do little gigs in them, or you can do larger roles. And there's opportunities to contribute work and participate in leadership governance. You participate in the governance of it as much as, or as little as you want when you're part of the DAO. So all interesting stuff and how this could be applied for the work world. But I'll get to concerns. Yeah, and I think we only have till 11:30, so I want to make sure I get to, Cynthia's got some really good content about metaverse, so I'm going to get to that. Concerns with DAOs, they would require a significant amount of training for the average person to interact. I'm fairly tech savvy myself. I've dabbled in coding and stuff in the past, and I still had a really difficult time. They operate off Discord, which is a chat app that comes from the gaming world. But when you first jump into one of those Discords, it's pretty overwhelming. There's usually 100 or so channels of various activities, and trying to sort through it is not easy. Limited types of work opportunities at the moment, you know, so there's not a lot of work for our communities probably right now, but some of it could be translated into work that we do. The payments only in crypto, and sometimes even in a native token that's pretty volatile, maybe even more so than Ether or Bitcoin. And the sustainability DAOs. A lot of these DAOs are going to crash and burn like any startup would, you know, that's going to happen with a lot of them. So picking winners for people to work in or what have you would be very difficult. So I'm going to pass it on to Cynthia for.
All right. I love, love, love talking about the metaverse. So let's just keep it moving with some misconception. Well, one big misconception about the metaverse, which I hear all the time, and that is that people think that the company formerly known as Facebook is the metaverse. And that is not the case. I hear that all the time. In reality, this is just a name change. It's really about anchoring their work in the metaverse. You've probably seen some of the ads that Meta has run. I've got some just like little screenshots down below to really demonstrate what is possible or what will be possible when we experience the full metaverse, which will probably be, people say, in another 10 years. So you see a screenshot of students in class using augmented and virtual reality to learn. And keep in mind, we're talking about not just VR, but really immersive experiences where people are physically in separate locations, but together virtually. You see a physician practicing a procedure. You see history students watching a debate. So, this is really interesting in terms of as we think about what we can expect for the future of the metaverse. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that Facebook/Meta is now facing a lot of pressure from investors to scale back on their approach to the metaverse. I was reading an article, I think it was in Fortune, that was just released yesterday. One of the things that they're being asked to do is scale back their investments to less than $5 billion a year. So I'm not sure what that's going to mean in terms of the future direction of Facebook/Meta, but they are very much interested and invested in the metaverse, which like I said, we have not experienced fully yet, but we have definitely experienced kind of building blocks that will be very important in the metaverse. So what is the metaverse? Next slide, please. So I regard Matthew Ball as really the leading authority on the metaverse. And this is how he defines the metaverse. Now, this is a very, very dense definition. A massively scaled and interoperable network of real-time rendered 3D virtual worlds that can be experienced synchronously and persistently by an effective, unlimited number of users with an individual sense of presence and with continuity of data such as identity, history, entitlements, objects, communications, and payments. All right, what does that even mean? Because that was really dense and there's a lot there, right? So here's what stands out to me about this definition of the metaverse. We're looking at not just one, but a network of different 3D virtual worlds that allows for information to be exchanged across these worlds. So you might, hear about different virtual worlds now. When we think about the metaverse, all of these worlds are going to be networked. With the whole idea of interoperability, it means that you're going to be able to go from one virtual world to the next. You're going to be able to take your digital assets with you from one world to another. Another thing that stands out about this description is that these virtual worlds will operate all at the same time. They can be accessed 24/7 by anyone, and it's really up to users to decide how they experience these virtual worlds within the metaverse. So just like the virtual worlds available today, users will be able to determine their identity based on their avatars. They'll be able to engage and have immersive experiences with other people, and they'll be able to make purchases in these virtual worlds. So that's kind of an overview. I just hope that, if you take one thing away from this, think about what we see today in terms of virtual worlds as being virtual worlds, which are really going to be important to the metaverse. But the metaverse, we're thinking about these virtual worlds being networked and connected and easy to go from one to another in a way that's much more seamless than anything that we have seen to date. So next slide, please. All right, so VR will be a really big part of the metaverse experience. A lot of companies have already started to adopt VR in their businesses. There was a PwC 2022 Metaverse survey. It found that 51% of companies are either in the process of integrating VR into their strategy or have already built VR into at least one dedicated line of business. So of course, lots of implications in terms of the work that folks here are doing. It's a really great time. If you haven't already started to think about what virtual experiences can mean to the people that you serve when it comes to social skills development, job skills development, and then also getting people to prepare for workplace collaboration. When it comes to social skills, I just want to point out Second Life. And this Second Life is a virtual world. This actually been around since like 2003. There's a lot of research, I shouldn't say a lot, but there is research, solid research on how Second Life really helped people develop social skills, especially folks who have autism spectrum disorder. It helps users feel more comfortable communicating in virtual worlds when compared to the physical world. So that's just something to think about. Also, it can really be used, these virtual worlds, for empathy training, which can lead to better social skills. Then there's the whole job skill training piece, because virtual worlds allow folks to practice real world scenarios. And I'm looking at the chat right now, and I see that there have been experiences with Second Life and with virtual worlds. When we think about job skills and training, virtual worlds can really promote learning and retention. It also allows people to demonstrate what they know, skills that they have already acquired. So when you're doing a traditional job interview or there's a resume, you kind of talk about what you can do, right? Well, when we think about these virtual worlds, people have the opportunity to really show what they can do. And I also expect that we'll see virtual worlds lead to more virtual workplace collaboration. Using an avatar to represent yourself in this virtual space allows you to work along, like I said before, colleagues while they are physically distant. This has a lot of implications as we think about people working working remotely more and more. I am really, really excited in terms of the future direction of the metaverse, but it does not come without concerns. So let me just share some concerns when it comes to metaverse experiences. Here's a headline, CNBC headline: racism could ruin the metaverse if tech doesn't improve diversity now, CTO warns. It absolutely is a problem. And I would just share with you my own experience going into one of these virtual worlds as an avatar that resembles kind of sort of what I look like. So if you could just hit that button for me. This was my avatar going into a virtual world. Kind of looks like me. I thought it was great until I got in the virtual world, and my avatar, I should say, was actually assaulted. It was very confusing the first time it happened. And then it happened more and more. So what I did was I created another avatar. And if you could just press that button one more time, this is my alter ego now when I go in virtual world. Avatar named Big Chuck. I don't know if you all have seen the movie Ready Player One, but it's kind of like a nod to that movie. You've got to check it out if you're interested more in what a metaverse could look like. And when I have presented in a virtual world using the avatar Big Chuck, do you know how many times I have experienced any type of bullying, harassment, or assault? 0. So that's just something to keep in mind in terms of we've got to think about social issues and people behind the technology before we can really, make these claims that, blockchain Web 3 is going to be the great equalizer. And Matthew, if you could hit the button one more time. This is just an excerpt that I found from, we've got 10 minutes before we take, or 3 minutes left before we take our break. And I'm just going to end on this. This was something that was posted on LinkedIn. It was a response to a posting from somebody Meta about, their work in the metaverse. And he says, I was an early Oculus user and metaverse OG, think way back, Second Life. And my Horizon experience, early beta, has not been the best. My avatar is Black and the number of racist comments I get is off the charts. I feel like I'm blocking people every time I visit a new world. I hope you can do something about that. So I just wanted to point out this issue as you think about using metaverse experiences. They're going to be great, but you could also run into challenges. This is a challenge that I have faced. And with that, I think we probably are down to 2 minutes left. So any questions or any comments that people would like to make?